I'd like to welcome to your show and mine, Bobby Ramos, Bottom Line, the author of a fantastic book, Macho Time, The Meteoric Rise and Tragic Fall of Hector Macho Camacho, authored by my buddy, Mr. Christian Guidice. Christian, welcome back to the show.
Hey, it is absolute treat to be back here, Bobby. You got my name perfect, man. That was perfect.
Yeah, it's about time after the 20 times I've talked to you. Finally got it right. But folks, before we get started, don't forget to go to my website, Bobby Ramos Bottom Line, to see my fantastic review about this great book. And check out, Showtime has streaming the Hector Camacho story. Fantastic look on Showtime. First of all, I gotta say, I've read a lot of books in my time, and your book has the most interesting and exciting covers, front, back, the liner that I've ever seen. We all know that Camacho loved his leopard print, and that's what's on the book. And it's just like amazing. Folks, when you open it up, you see the leopard print on the inside. It's such an eye grab, man. Whoever came up with that, man, great idea.
Bobby, it's a really interesting story. We had an original cover, and it didn't really highlight the flash and the charisma of Camacho. That's what defined him, and it just so we actually changed the cover, and the Hamilcar Publishing, who I worked with, they did they wanted to make this a signature book. They wanted people to see, just the flair and you love just the print, the macho in gold. And I remember just falling in love with it when I saw it. And it's unlike, as far as the style and the flair of it, it's unlike any of the other books.
Never seen anything like it. And for the folks, you got to remember the flair that Macho had. Bam. Okay. The boy could fight, but he had that flair. Now, I got to get into, for the record, for those of you who may not remember or didn't know how great Hector Macho Camacho was as a fighter, his ring record was 79-6-3. That means 79 wins, 6 losses, and three draws. As an amateur, he was 96-4. 96-4 as an amateur. And you see all these fighters now, and they're champions with 30 and 25 fights under their belt. It's just ridiculous. And for you kids out there who don't know him, look him up, check him out on YouTube. But he beat some of the biggest names in boxing. Edwin Rosario, Olympic champion, Howard Davis Jr., Boom Boom Mancini, Vinny Pazienza. A technical knockout over my boy, the great Sugar Ray Leonard. And folks, I want you to hear me loud and clear on this. I got to readjust, Christian. He beat Duran. He beat Roberto Duran twice. He beat Roberto Duran twice. I mean, that's the kind of fighter that he was. Talk about him as a fighter.
Yeah, I think what you really touch upon, and what everybody, when you ask someone to look back at Hector Camacho, the fights you named are the ones that people were certainly drawn to. I think if you looked at the early fights, early on in his career, you saw a guy who had so many tools in his bag that you just couldn't, there's nothing that you could do to really disrupt what he was doing in the ring. He had movement. He had power. His power was generated off his speed. He threw in combinations that you couldn't even imagine. His movement was spectacular. I wrote a book on Wilfredo Gomez, and I remember watching Wilfredo Gomez. But the way Camacho moved around the ring, the way that he put himself in a position to punch, the way that his defense. I mean, some people think against some fighters, yeah, he did get hit. But I mean, he was a spectacular defensive fighter. I mean, he had everything that you wanted in a fighter, a young fighter coming up out of the amateurs. And when he started in 1980, from 1980 to 1985, he was just a brilliant boxer, fun to watch, aggressive, took the initiative, could lead, could counter, and all these things. And then you add the component of being an entertaining guy. I mean, he was just a tantalizing mix to watch him at this stage in his career. So I think the early version of Hector Camacho was nearly unbeatable. And I don't say that about many fighters, but you know, the one thing that it didn't even mention is he brought that edge from Spanish Harlem, and you know, and he incorporated that into his repertoire, Bobby. I mean, you know, a lot of tough guys, you know, they fight in, you know, when they fight in the ring, they don't necessarily adopt a lot of the, you know, the things that they did outside the ring or in street fighting. But actually, you know, when you think of a stylist like Camacho, you don't necessarily think about a guy who is just so tough that when you're not looking, he's going to pull your head down and give you an uppercut, you know, when you're not looking, and knock you out. I mean, so even if you wanted to get physical with him, you couldn't.
Right. Yeah. He just had everything going for him. And I wanted to get into this. You wrote, this is your fourth great book about a Latino champion. And we showed the Gomez book that you had just talked about, but also you wrote about the Hands of Stone, Roberto Duran. And folks, everybody knew about Roberto Duran. Mm-hmm. They knew what a beast he was. And it's a fantastic book in its own right. Done by Christian right there. So you're talking about Gomez, you're talking about Duran. You also did a fantastic book about my boy Alexis Arguello, beloved warrior. Fantastic book, fantastic fighter, and Warrior fit him 100%. 100% Warrior just fit Arguello. I have a couple of questions on these four guys that you did the books on. Which of the four stories in your books touched you the most?
Touched me the most. It had to. I think Alexis was, when you talk about Alexis was just different. The storyline was so much different than the other fighters. I mean, I think you know, writing about Camacho and seeing it through the eyes of his son and family members was heartbreaking at times, especially the way that he died. But when I think about Alexis Arguello, I think about a guy who, you know, his story, there were so many different angles, so many different parts to his storyline, that it was hard not to be touched by what happened to him. It was so sad. I mean, the Sandinistas took his, you know, expropriated his property when he was fighting. He couldn't go. He could no longer go home. And you know, just to, I mean, that's where it started. That's where the storyline started. As soon as he became a champion, he no longer go back to Nicaragua. And then it moved from there. And you know, after. And I think watching Alexis and the deterioration of his, maybe deterioration isn't fair. I mean, his downfall, and the political element of it, and the mystery behind it. I think it was more. There was a shock value, but also this level of sorrow. Because if you looked at the four, I think they all meant so much to so Duran to Panama. When you look at Wilfredo Gomez to Puerto Rico, when you look at Camacho to Spanish Harlem, and you look at with Alexis Arguello, he was Nicaragua, and to see that his people, you know, this political element turned on him like it did, it was just sad, and I think it transcended boxing so much that I think it was hard to grasp. And I think really, so Bobby, it was really hard to write as well, because, you know, I had to go beyond the boxing scope and try to figure out how can I do Alexis justice and tell his story, but also get it right. And I didn't have that element with Camacho. I mean, Camacho, you know, it was sad and tragic that how the end of his life. especially when you look at how vibrant and how energized and how loving and passionate he could be when he was in his prime, and you know, and he was this fashion icon, but as well as this boxer. So I think it was a little bit different. The stories were a little bit different, and I think
that's leading to my next question. Which do you think was the most tragic of the stories?
I think the most tragic, Camacho. You know, it's just,
Right.
and I might be saying that, Bobby, because it's so fresh. But the he had, and this goes for, I mean, it's a hard question, because I think, you know, you could probably go either way. But when you look at Hector Camacho and you listen to people talk about him, he had so much life. He had so much more to give, and I think our Alexis did too. Don't get me wrong, right. But I think with Camacho, one of the things, and one of the family members mentioned this later on in the book, and they said, you know what, I was waiting for Hector, or Mach, they would say, to be the guy that I thought he would be later on in his life, to kind of grow into that guy that I wanted him to be, and I believed he could be. And you know, so when I talk about the tragedy, I mean, he you know, he was coming back. He's kind of recovering. He was reinvigorated a little bit. Had some TV shows going for him, but he couldn't get away from his vices and the drugs. You know, that was his downfall. And I think when you see a guy who just you know is defined by the life that, you know, the life and the vibrancy, and then to see the way he died, that was too tragic. I couldn't. It's hard to compare any story to that one.
And what's interesting, it's sad, but out of Sugar Ray Leonard had a cocaine problem. Camacho did. Arguello did.
Right.
You know, and there's a lot of, not just entertainers, but a lot of athletes, period, especially from that era, suffered with that beast on their back. For the folks who don't know, Arguello, as great as a champion as he was, and such a regal kind of guy, he had some demons, and he ended up committing suicide. Camacho was murdered. If you could question either one of them prior to, what would your one most pressing question be to each of them?
Well, the first thing with Arguello, I think we'd have to, you know, and to be honest, I think in the book I present it, I try to, you know, I don't know if he committed suicide, and I know that, you know, that we'll one day we'll figure out what the real truth behind that particular story is. I don't think that story has been unraveled completely.
Right.
But if I asked Alexis Arguello, one of the things that I think I would just want to know, at a period in his life when he couldn't go home, I'd want him, you know, because I don't think he ever talked about it. I want to talk about, you know, the thing, you know, I'd ask him what he missed most, and how emotionally did he cope with that? Because he never talked. He was very, like you said, regal. He was a gentleman of the ring.
Right.
People loved him, right? Because of the way that he treated others with such respect, and he gained that respect. The media loved him because he was, you know, this gentleman of the ring. But I want to know, you know, what was it like? How did you manage being, you know, forced out of your homeland and thinking that you would never return again? And so I want him to just talk about that. And also, I'd ask him, because, you know, I got to speak with him and interview him a little bit for the book, but I want to know, you know, as far as, you know, the knockout style. I always thought that he timed it perfectly in a fight about when he wanted to take an opponent out. And I'd ask him that. I'd say, you know, Alexis, it seemed like you turned it on when you wanted to. Was that something natural, or was that something that you know, it just happened, you know, or did you calculate it? You know, because I feel like in each of those fights, late in a lot of those fights, you know, he moved methodically, and then he sped up. So I'd want to know about his style. So I'd have a stylistic question, but I also want to know more of the emotional question. And with Camacho, you know, I want to know about what it feels like to be a hero of Spanish Harlem, and because I think there's twofold question with this, because he was truly a hero to a lot of those young kids. A lot of the people I interviewed said, you know, people don't really understand. But when I was growing up, you know, I looked at Hector Camacho. I wasn't a boxer, but I knew that I felt like if he could do something like that, I could do something. It didn't have to be boxing, but it was just a motivation to see him running through the streets of Spanish Harlem. And I'd want to know what it felt like to be a hero of Spanish Harlem and the pressures that he felt coming out and being a professional fighter, because a lot of those guys in that neighborhood didn't think he'd ever get beyond get beyond the amateurs because of all the trouble that he was getting into. So I want to know, what was it like being a hero of Spanish Harlem? And the second thing is that I really want to know is, why didn't you ever did you ever talk to someone? Did you ever seek help? Because it doesn't seem like toward the end of his life, it seemed like, and from all interviews that I did for the book, that he never sought help for all the problems that he was facing, and it just started to pile up as his career went on.
Christian, you mentioned that you're not sure that Arguello committed suicide. What do you think probably happened then?
No, I think the Sandinistas pressured him into. I think they put him into a corner. Like they pressured him physically and mentally one night, and that his last night of his life. I don't know. You know, it's hard for me to say. I don't know if he committed suicide, but I just don't. But I also I don't put anything past the Sandinistas as to what they're capable of, if that makes any sense. So I don't know the answer to that question. I do think we will know one day what the answer to that question is, but probably not for a long time.
Long time. Your Duran book, that was turned into a major movie starring Robert De Niro. Camacho was such a lightning rod. I know you would like it to happen, but could you see that being turned into a movie? His story?
Oh, even more so. I mean, it's just with Camacho. I think Duran. I mean, let's talk about Duran coming up in Panama and just so many areas to focus on with Duran. I mean, just a beloved fighter. But I think Camacho, his story, coming out of Spanish Harlem, fleeing Puerto Rico at age 4 because of an abusive father, fleeing Puerto Rico with his mother at age 4, then growing up on his own, pretty much on his own in Spanish Harlem, becoming a hero, breaking out of Spanish Harlem, winning 3 titles. Then you have the unfortunate storyline of the drug issue. But I think his story makes such a compelling movie. And I think about it every day, because there are so many young actors who I could just envision as a young Hector Camacho. So I just have to say, I mean, it's a story that's got to be made as a movie. I mean, it's and I think now, especially with with boxing movies, I don't think it has to be a boxing movie, but I think the movie has to humanize Hector rather than just make it a straight boxing movie.
I wanted to bring this up. In your book, the first paragraph of the foreword, written by Carlos Acevedo, he stated that Camacho, and I quote, was garish, crude, outlandish, rude, reckless, and loud. And everyone paid attention to him, and he made sure of that, close quote. My question for that is, and he also said that he was the first fighter since Cassius Clay / Muhammad Ali in the 60s to master the art of negative appeal. I would agree with that. I think that Sonny Liston had a negative image, and George Foreman, people forget in his early days, but they were known as just bad guys and monsters. Ali and Camacho came from a whole different vein. Based on that, do you think with social media being the way it is today, how do you think that would have worked with Camacho? I mean, because everything you do, everything you say is boom, 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 out there, out there, out there. And he loved the attention. He loved the attention. I could see where he would have loved it, my opinion, but I can see where it would have ate him up.
I was just gonna say, you literally stole the words, Bobby, right out of my mouth. I think it would have. No, you took it. I was just about to say it would have engulfed him. I mean, it would have been overwhelming. I don't think there were too many things happening with Camacho. I mean, I think with social media, if you take certain risks, calculated risk, and you have a strategy on you know, and on how to use social media as a tool, and someone was leading that with Hector, I think maybe it would have been successful. But there are too many different you know, how do I say it? Too many different platforms for him. I think it would have, you know, like when you said ate him up, I mean, he was so off the cuff that it just wouldn't have been received in the same way. And I think that he came along just at the right time in his career. The boxing world needed Hector Camacho. Sugar Ray Leonard was toward the end of his career, and Sugar Ray endorsed Camacho and said, "Hey, this guy can do it. This guy can be the next Sugar Ray. He just needs to, you know, he needs to be settled down, and he can't continue to live the life that he's living." But you make up you bring a great point up when you say it would have eaten him up, because I just think, especially with a lot of these athletes, that, you know, first of all, they allow social media to become too big of an influence in their life, and I think he might have been. You know, he might have that might have been a major issue with Camacho. But you know, when he was coming up, you know, he was the original. You know, Mayweather came on later on. You know, Jorge Paez was a guy who was also flashy, and Nassim
he was
Ahmed.
out there too. Yeah.
But none of them were like Camacho. Camacho was willing to move. You know, he might have been brash and crude at times and arrogant, but there was always a method to his madness. It wasn't just like, I'm going to be like that to raise the ire of my opponent. It was like, I'm going to be like that, but at the same time, I'm going to dance to the ring and have fun, okay, at your expense, even if it's going to get you upset. Like, so I understand that part. The costumes, it all worked together, and I think too many of the boxers who tried to follow his lead were one-dimensional, in the sense that they could be the heel and sell tickets that way. Camacho was fun. I mean, he was spectacular in that ring. He would dance for a half hour before he even got out there.
Right.
And even when he was on the backside of his career, you went to see him, even if you didn't like him. I remember against Ray Mancini, I wasn't a huge fan of Camacho, and I remember watching that fight, and I was thinking, you know, I loved Camacho when he was, 20, 21 years old. I was like just mesmerized by that guy. But when he fought Mancini, I did not like him. So he was doing something right.
Yeah, I was always a big fan of his. What he had going also for him, first of all, as far as men, yeah, he was cocky, talked a lot of crap and all of that. But he also had this likable, lovable quality, like he was your little brother. You just wanted to give him a noogie in the head and kick him in the ass, tell him shut up and go on about his business. That's just he just had that about himself. And also, as far as the ladies, I mean, he was a sharp-looking guy, and the ladies loved him. He just had a lot going for him. He just had a lot going for him. And for the younger fans who don't know, or people forgot, like I said, he won 3 separate championships in 3 different weight classes. He's in the Hall of Fame, and he was just that unique of a fighter. Talk about how he was pegged for stardom very early in his career, And, 8, 10 fights, he was pegged as a superstar. And already CBS Channel 2 was already broadcasting his fights. Do you think that helped him or hurt him?
No, that was what made him. I mean, I think so. Having that type of success and that type of exposure early on was really what made Hector Camacho. I mean, he had all the skills, but I think seeing him come up on CBS. I mean, there was just something special about him. I mean, old time fighters were saying he's doing things that are you wouldn't ever imagine a young fighter at this age to do. And I think when you have guys like Gil Clancy, who was just a master, a reader of great boxers, and he was in love with Hector Camacho. And so I think having that exposure
Clancy was kind of a tough guy too.
Yeah.
He was
talking about Clancy?
Guy. Yeah.
Yeah. He was. I mean, he wasn't, and Hector was drawn to trainers and mentors who were straightforward, who were tough, but also had an affectionate side to him and to them. And I think coming up on CBS I really think it was the best thing that ever happened to him, because I think it gave him more focus to say, okay, I'm the star now, rather than fighting 30 fights, against, not mediocre competition. I think it forced him to fight good fighters and make good matchups early on, rather than going through 35, patsies and having to kind of build his resume that way. So his 15th fight, he was fighting an undefeated fighter and Louis Lloyd. And then he was fighting guys like Johnny Sato. So I think that forced him not only to focus, but also to test himself against good fighters. I mean, these are pretty good fighters to fight at that stage in his career. So, I would have rather him. I think that was the right way to bring Hector up. I don't think you had any other choice, because there was always that concern. There was always that fear that that he was going to unravel, that he was going to fall back on some of the, some of the things that he was doing.
So they wanted to get him when times were good, also, just from the selfish side of it. CBS, they knew that there were some issues with him, and I think that they wanted to hitch to his wagon because he may flame out for whatever reason. He didn't, but they knew it was very possible.
Yeah, I mean, and that was, you just you couldn't find a fighter, who had those attributes, and at the same time, was as entertaining at that stage. He just had those qualities, and you're right. I mean, I think hitching it to the Camacho wagon, was vital. I mean, for both CBS and Camacho at that time. That what they didn't take into account, or what they couldn't foresee, was the managerial problems and the inactivity that plagued him later on.
Right. One of the things that, there was a couple of things that I really loved about him. He was tough as hell, and that was something he didn't get credit for. But he had everybody knew he had incredible hand and foot speed. But he reminded me of the recent, as you said, Floyd Mayweather. Quick hands, quick feet, and a great defensive fighter. He had a lot of similarities with Floyd Mayweather, except for one thing. He had a better punch than Mayweather. Camacho, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit later, he had more power than a lot of people realize. Freddie Roach, everybody knows him as the great trainer today, but he was also a pretty good fighter in his day. And he fought and lost to Camacho. And what he said was, his hand speed was something that was at another level, that he wasn't prepared for that. And he ended up biting. Camacho. So I just want the young fans to know, Tyson wasn't the only fighter to bite somebody in the ring. Okay. Freddie Roach, Mr. Grandfatherly, great trainer, bit Camacho in the ring because he couldn't deal with him. So I just wanted to put that out there so people know that. Thank you. I appreciate it. Family, thanks for listening and always supporting your show and mine, Bobby Ramos, Bottom Line. I don't want to be a man of power, but I do want to be a man of purpose. I'm Bobby Ramos. Thank you for your time, this time. Until next time.